Hey, you creeps. I'm back with an assortment of scary stories featuring the unexplained, hybrid ghosts, and a skinwalker caught in its most private moments. Enjoy these allegedly true scary stories. And if you notice a change in my audio, it's because I had to move my setup out of the closet. Yeah, I've been narrating in a closet for a while now. But it was too hot in there and too small, so you might hear a bit more reverb or echo. Go to darkstories.org to send me your stories so I can narrate them, and check out my other show, Freaky Folklore, hosted by Carmen Carrion, on your favorite podcast platforms. Now, let's begin. The Whistler, from Chip Oil, 1991. I'm a freshly graduated high school student, and on my way to college. During my senior year, I had a job working for my grandfather as a farmhand. Well, more or less a farm manager. He would give me instructions on what to do to the farm without him being there, most commonly feeding the cows. It was early November, and at this moment in time, baseball practice started after school, and it would last from 3:25 to 5:30 p.m. By that time, the sun would be almost down when I arrived at work and would start getting ready. One day, I had gotten dressed, filled up the buckets, and fed the first farm when I realized I didn't have a key to the other farm. Frustrated, I was forced to pick up 2 buckets at a time and walk them from the fence to the feed troughs, a good 40-yard walk. While walking, I was trying to keep myself upbeat. I just started to whistle. No real pattern or tune to it, but something that I came up with. When I came back and put the last buckets in the bed of the truck, I heard something from my neighboring property. It was whistling. Strange, I thought. No one lives anywhere near that property, and it sounded very close. I rationalized it as a mockingbird or something, and continued on. The next couple of days I didn't whistle, but the whistling I'd hear would continue, and slowly over those few days it got clearer and clearer, until it sounded just like regular whistling, and eventually it got louder. When I'd first heard it, it was very faint. I almost missed it over the crunching of me walking to my truck. Over the course of those days, I kind of became accustomed to the whistling, and I kind of expected it. One day later, when it didn't come, I was actually a little disappointed. This time I'd brought the key, and I walked up to the gate and started fiddling with my keys when I dropped them into the grass. I said dang it, and squatted down, starting to search for them. It was then that I heard a very faint sound coming from the other property. A low groan or gurgle. It was getting louder. At this point, I wasn't scared, but more curious as to what was going on over there. I left my truck parked across from the property and walked a few feet down the road, hopping the fence to the property where I heard the sounds. The land over there goes straight uphill and is heavily wooded all throughout, and the further you go up, the more and more dense it gets. Looking back now, I made a few big mistakes that could have gotten me hurt. As I walked up the hill, I would occasionally hear the gurgle. It was still far up the hill, so it was as faint as it was before. As I walked on, a bad smell began to hit my nose. A weird mixture of garbage and wet dog. I heard something as I was about to crest the hill. A very dry, low, and quiet, distorted "dang it" came from a couple yards in front of me. It sounded like a 60-year-old smoker saying "dang it" really slowly, and I automatically thought someone was on our property. Somewhat angry and paranoid now, I started to move slower. I didn't want this guy to hear me before I could see them. I kept going, and I stopped and listened when I heard another sound. Dang it, dang it, dang it. This guy was slowly saying dang it normally, not long and drawn out in that eerie way as if he didn't know English. I sat down on this log, kind of listening, trying to figure out what I should do about this person. He kept saying "dang it" over and over, and I noticed that his tone was getting higher, and his inflection was changing, and it hit me. This guy was perfectly mimicking me. My tone, my inflection, literally everything. He even mimicked my frustration when I said it. Teed off and kind of scared now, I got up and began to crest the hill. I flicked on my flashlight on my phone. "Hey, this is private property." I was cut off mid-sentence. As I came over the hill, my light barely illuminated a naked figure squatting just a couple of yards in front of me. His eyes were illuminated by the faint glow of my flashlight. I automatically felt that something was wrong. This wasn't a regular person. His neck was longer than normal, and when I came up the hill, he winched his neck and snapped his head to look at me, without moving the rest of his body. His eyes were too big, and his head was large and slender. He sat squatted down in a ballerina-type squat. I looked at his body. He was very skinny. His ribs were showing through his skin. There was a short silence, and like a robot, the man turned in the leaves and slowly stood with his hands next to his side. I was debating whether or not this was even a person. It was far too tall to be a person. "Dang it," it said in my voice. I turned and I sprinted down the hill. It didn't feel like I was running, but more like my legs were just going through the motions. I didn't look back before I got to the fence, and when I hopped it, I got in my truck and sped away. Sadly, I still work at that farm, but I've never told anyone this story, not even my grandfather. I've only heard the whistling a few more times since then. Something tried to kill my friend's dog. From Just a Simple Username. This happened a few years ago. I'm 6'1", and I'm in decent shape. I was taking my dog out at about 11:45 p.m. one night. A light drizzle of rain was beginning to fall when I suddenly hear this ape-like sound. Now, immediately I think I was just hearing things, because I live in Virginia, and I know there are no apes or monkeys out here. Once I finished up my walk, I brought my dog back inside and locked all the doors and closed the blinds. Before I knew it, I'd hit the pillow and fell asleep. I woke up sometime later. I checked my phone, and it read 2:33 a.m. I was wondering what woke me up. I looked towards the glass door that leads to a small deck. This doesn't have a blind on it. When I looked in that direction, I saw this dark shape just perched on the deck rail. This was 2 stories up, and the deck hangs off the house, so I was wondering how this thing or person got up there in the first place. After looking away, then back at it, I saw bright yellow eyes. I couldn't make out any other features, except for the cloth-looking thing around its waist. When I looked away again and looked back, it was gone. This takes me to the second day. There was no rain, and nothing odd happened that day. A few days later, a heavy downpour had begun. By then, the creature I'd seen was not on my mind, so when I went to sleep on the couch, I didn't close the blinds. I woke up to a cracking noise. I had left the outdoor lights on that night. I looked out the window. There, again, I saw that thing. This time, it was trying to get inside the house. I got a better look at it. I thought the devil himself was coming in to get me. It was gray with sagging skin, too loose to fit on its body. It was very thin and tall, and though its skin was loose, I could still see ribs sticking out from underneath. Its eyes were bright yellow, and the odd thing about it was it had antlers protruding from its head, and there was stuff hanging off those antlers. I looked at its body again and saw it was decaying. Suddenly, it let out a horrifying screech. Then it was gone. When I went out there the next day, in the mud were some human-looking footprints, with coyote prints leading away. I wish I could say I never saw it again, but I did. 2 weeks later, in the middle of the day, a light rain, much like the first time I saw it, was coming down. But this time was different, as I found it standing in the field outside my house. Without a thought, I ran in the house and grabbed my .270 caliber rifle. I aimed at it and fired one single shot. I watched as it screamed that god-awful noise, then ran off the other way. The next day, I asked to stay with my parents until I could find a new house, as I was now definitely moving out of that one. These days, I live in Northern Virginia, and I've never had any problems since. But sometimes when I'm alone, I see those yellow eyes, and I hear that god-awful screech in the distance. If you live in the southeast part of Virginia, I warn you, there is something that only hunts in the rain. Update. At the time of writing this update, this happened 3 days ago. I was telling my friend about this experience. He looked at me and started to laugh. This upset me, seeing as though this experience had shaken me to the core. When I mentioned that I think it was a skinwalker, avoiding saying the word as supposedly that could draw it to you or give it power, he looked at me again and did the thing I least expected. He said if there was such thing as a skinwalker, tell it to come get him. I've listened to many stories about skinwalkers, and I've researched it. It is said if you mock the creature or make fun of it, it could show you just how real it is. After that, we went to his house and just chilled out, playing Call of Duty on his PS4. I don't consider myself good at shooters, and lost most of the games. Eventually, I got bored, and I decided to go get a Coke from the fridge when his dog, Winnie, suddenly ran past me and began to bark at something outside the window. I thought she just needed to do her business, so I let her out. Now, Winnie was a well-trained German Shepherd, so we had no worries about letting her out. We knew she'd come back to the door and scratch when she was ready to be let back in. As I was walking back to Tony, I heard Winnie barking, but not the passive kind. It was like the "I'll rip you to shreds" kind of bark. While she's doing that, Tony looks at me concerned. We run back to the door to let her in. I've never seen a dog move faster than that in my life. As she came inside, she was growling and her tail was between her legs. She had never acted like that before, so we put her in her kennel for the night. After that, Tony and I went back to playing video games. We heard a tapping at the window at some point, and Tony got up, pushing the blinds aside. He said he saw nothing though, but the look in his eyes told me otherwise. Then we just decided to go to bed. In the morning, we let Winnie out of her kennel to do her business. We also went outside to enjoy some fresh air, and so Tony could have a smoke. I was walking around when I noticed gash marks under the window where the tapping had come from. This chilled me to the bone, but before I could call Tony over, Winnie began to whine in pain. Tony and I rushed to where she was, and when we saw her, an especially large coyote was attacking her. The odd thing about this coyote was its limbs, as they seemed to be too long for its body, and when I looked at its face, I saw those same familiar yellow eyes from all that time ago. Without a word, Tony ran inside and grabbed his .45. Without a word, he came out and began to fire at the creature. It let out a screech as one of the bullets hit the right front leg. It let go of Winnie and ran off into the woods. As it ran, I got a look at its backside, which was very slim and was tailless. Soon after, we rushed Winnie to the vet and got her treated. Thankfully, Winnie is doing well and will make a full recovery, and my friend never mocks me for my experience having one of his own now. All I can say is that the Native Americans were not making up these creatures. These monsters aren't just cautionary tales, they're very real, and I would advise you all to heed these warnings. And to that creature, let us never meet again. The Lights on the Mountain, from Chant, Recollect. Alright, I've spent a good amount of time thinking back on my teenage years, and how stupid I was with a lot of things. But as they say, hindsight is always 20/20, and I contribute most of what I learned about relationships from a guy named Jason. He was my first serious boyfriend. The fact that he was, still is by the way, a bit too old for a girl of my age back then probably helped a lot. He wasn't a predator, just so you know, but he had his demons and smoked greens to cope. His mom said he was born with the call, and that made him special. I wasn't too sure what that meant at the time, but after a little research, it made sense. Jason could not only see things, but help those around him see them too, as long as the other person wasn't a complete and utter skeptic. My dad assisted at a friend's dojo a few nights a week, and since he didn't really like that we were dating, I only had Jason around when Dad was gone. Our relationship was still relatively new, so we spent a lot of time getting to know each other. On this particular night, we were sitting on the step of the sliding door one night drinking cola, just staring into the distance and talking crap. About 8 miles in that direction was a mountain. Nothing special. A roughly 800-foot high molehill. I had my contacts in, and I could clearly make it out against the city lights behind it. Jason got quiet after about an hour, and asked if I wanted to see something amazing. Vegetation here is savanna, so trees don't grow tall and are few and far between. Of course, I exclaimed. He told me to focus on that there hill, and nothing else. Take deep breaths in your nose and out your mouth. Blink only when you have to, he said. The humidity and my contacts might have helped, because I ended up blinking less than 3 times per minute. Soon, I saw people with flashlights on that hill. I told Jason, but he didn't respond. The more I looked, the more I noted how those flashlights were moving too fluidly, too smoothly to be flashlights. If you see someone carrying one in the distance, you'd know that those lights flash when the person points it in different directions, more towards or further away from your own direction. These lights were constant in size and pale blue in intensity. How are dull blue torches useful? I thought to myself. I counted more or less 12 of them, but didn't know how many were on the other side of that hill, and they didn't seem to acknowledge the other's presence at all. I asked Jason what the heck we were looking at. He said to look away if it started to feel like a line was being created between me and those things. I was confused. But then, okay, imagine you and a friend are holding opposite ends of a rope. Imagine consciously being aware that the rope connects the two of you, and no matter where you are, as long as you both hold on, the rope will bring you back together if you pulled it towards you. It was also like being on the other end of feeling as though someone was watching you, I guess. That's what this felt like, as if I was building a bridge. Some of the lights slowed down. Amazement turned to fear, and I looked away. It's as if those things went blind to my presence again, and that was it. Jason hugged me to his side and explained that they're ghosts or spirits. He said they were either a collection of 3 or 4 different races of soldiers. Our area was very chaotic back in the colonization era. Everyone wanted a piece of this land. He didn't know exactly what happened, but speculated that something transpired on that hill that caused the deaths of a lot of people at the same time. They must not know that they've been dead for over 100 years, or they've got some unfinished business and can't move on. I asked what he meant by unfinished business. Jason went, I don't know. Maybe some have a message they need to tell a loved one, or maybe their remains are still there, or they were unceremoniously buried in unmarked graves and aren't happy about it. He went on to say that they're a real pain in the butt once they pick up that you can see them. They'll enter your dreams and make you see things in the corners of your eyes late at night. Mostly, they just want to know that it's okay. They can move on. Their families, etc., are already waiting for them on the other side. Because, you know, the war happened over 9 decades ago. Anyway, that event was my introduction to the spiritual. Quite a lot of things happened after that, but those are stories for a different time. Those orbs are pretty mesmerizing, but don't stare too long. They might feel your gaze. Eyes in the Trees, from Noelle. I never really believed in myths or legends about Bigfoot or werewolves, but after what happened to me, I 100% do. My uncle owns about 20 acres of land in northern Michigan. There's a small grassy area where he keeps his cabin that's surrounded by dense forest. I've never really gone deep into the woods, mostly because I was scared of bears and all that. Last summer, I went up north, that's what we call northern Michigan, with my mom and older brother. We were staying about an hour away from my uncle's place, in a city by Lake Michigan for a carnival. But first, we stopped by my uncle's place on the way there, at around 9:30 p.m. As we got out of the car, I noticed my uncle sat in his lawn chair facing the woods with one of his guns by a fire. He didn't even acknowledge our arrival. As we got closer, my mom called out his name. He blinked and slowly turned his head towards us. He looked really freaked out. I'd never seen him like that. My uncle is a pretty intimidating guy, big muscles and a stern look, so I felt a little put off by his expression. He nodded his head and looked back toward the woods, his grip tightening around his gun. I shared a look with my brother, who seemed as put off as I was. My mom asked, "You good?" And all he did was shrug and sigh. After a few long seconds of silence, he speaks. "You guys should get going. I'm heading out soon anyway." What's going on?" my older brother asks. My uncle shakes his head as he heads for his truck, gun still in hand. We all back away towards the car and hop in. I watched from the back window as we drove down the long driveway leading back to the dirt road. As we passed by a little clearing, I saw something in the woods behind it. I got excited and tried to get a better look because I thought it was a bear and I've never seen one. But the excitement soon vanished into fear once I got a better look. Its eyes stared back at me, hazel orbs that looked almost human. They seemed to glow in the moonlight. The eyes were about 8 feet off the ground, peeking through some tall branches. From the moonlight, I could see some brownish-gray fur and pointy ears like a dog. I gasped and choked out a shaky, "Mom?" We were past the clearing now, coming up to the end of the driveway. She replies with a, "Hmm?" I tear my gaze away from the dark woods. "Did you see that?" "See what?" she asked, confused. "The eyes." She shakes her head. "I didn't see any eyes." "Did you?" she asks my brother. He shakes his head and says, "Probably a bear." But I knew it wasn't a bear. It was too tall. Plus, bears don't have ears like dogs. I didn't say anything else or look out any windows to the woods. I don't know what I saw, but I do know it wasn't a bear. I've heard of dogmen and werewolves, but I never really believed in that stuff. But now, I just don't know. We're going back up north tomorrow, and I'm hoping not to see that thing again. The Cat-Headed Ghost, from Creepy Paranoia. This happened when I was in elementary school. But before we go to the story, I'll tell you first about my background. I was 13 years old at the time. I was a little older than my classmates. The reason for this was that I had a medical condition that my doctors diagnosed as tetralogy of Fallot, better known as congenital heart disease. I was born with this dreaded condition. My heart has holes in it. Because of that, I had a hard time breathing to the point of suffocating. When I walk just a small distance, not reaching 1 meter, I faint. The next thing I know is that I'm already lying on one of my teacher's laps, massaging my hands and fingers in order to regulate the oxygen in my circulatory system. When on the playground, I couldn't play, but just watched my classmates as they played. Because if I move, I know I'll pass out. Due to this, my mother decided to tell me that I should quit school. They had finally found a doctor that can help cure my ailment. The hospital was just outside of our province, so to get there, I had to ride an airplane or boat. There was actually a hospital within the area I lived in, but unfortunately there are no cardiologists that are skilled enough to do the surgery. Thankfully, my aunts found a hospital that has cardiosurgeons that are willing to help. The only problem is that the surgery is awfully expensive. But my mother didn't mind. She would just keep asking for money, from charity organizations to her wealthy relatives, in order to pay the hefty bill. When the time finally came, only my father accompanied me, and we rode in an airplane to get to Manila. I'm not exactly sure where the location of the hospital is specifically. When we eventually arrived at our destination, we met my paternal grandmother, who was waiting at the airport. While we waited for my doctor's appointment, I just had to wait. And no joke, I waited for at least 3 years. But I would occasionally go to the hospital for checkups. Eventually, the time came and the surgery was successful. I was already 10 years old when open-heart surgery was performed on me. When I finally arrived back in my hometown, I was feeling like $1,000,000. I can run, walk, do anything, but the doctor still cautioned me to not do too much. I was having a daily dose of medicine for my heart. It was in a powdery form. I would put it under my tongue every night at 9 after a meal, so that explains why I was studying elementary so late. Now, my mother was a teacher at this school, and the school was known for having poor financial stability. It's all dilapidated. The staff couldn't afford to renovate it. You can see that some of the wooden windows are already soft due to termites eating them, and the classroom chairs were like that as well. The window bars were extremely rusty too. Even the playground was rusted from old age. Most of the students here wear flip-flops. I'm the only child in there that wears shoes. I'm not trying to be judgmental. I'm not rich either, but the way I saw it was these children were poor. The way they dressed was very grungy. One day, everybody in the school was busy talking about this cat lady spirit. Apparently, it's the school's urban legend about a school nurse who got brutally murdered in one of the bathrooms. The scene was supposedly brutal. Pools of her blood covered the bathroom tiles. The most disturbing thing is that the ghost of this nurse haunts that specific bathroom. Apparently, they said that her spirit has the head of a cat and the body of a young female nurse, and it's covered in blood. It was absolutely horrifying to imagine. Well, most of the children believed it. I was already terrified to the point that I didn't want to go to that haunted bathroom. But one day, there was a girl who had gone there just to relieve herself, and she didn't believe in that tale. All of a sudden, she came rushing out of the bathroom screaming with terror. She said she saw that evil spirit. When I tried to look at the horrified look on the girl's face as she told us, she was very pale. Tears and sweat drenched her. I was absolutely disturbed by this. As time went by, I heard rumors that the girl who saw that ghost dropped out. Some say she went insane. The terror that lurks in that bathroom probably maimed her brain. I feel really sorry for her. She's traumatized because of that evil spirit in the school. That Bone-Chilling Night, from I See You. I'm a 23-year-old woman who used to live in a pretty urban area in India when I was 19. I've always loved reading scary stories, just because it's very interesting, and there's always something new to read. I never really believed in the paranormal. My head just couldn't wrap around the idea that there might be something more than humans and animals that can affect our lives, something unexplained that can harm us. But one night changed my mind. I still think that someone out there can explain what happened. I was living alone in an apartment building. It was in the heart of the city. Restaurants, malls all around, hustle, bustle all day and night. Nothing scary happened there. It was so alive that my room would still be lit at night with all my lights off. I've always slept with my curtains closed, curtains too thick to let any light through, and my nightlight on. It was a chilly night, so I was using a very thin bedsheet like blanket to keep me warm. I dozed off pretty quickly. I woke up sometime in the night. I had a king-sized bed and was sleeping near the edge facing my right. I was awakened by a pulling sensation, like someone was pulling my blanket. It wasn't the typical horror movie style pulling down the blanket thing where it goes down to my feet. It was a jolting pull. I turned to my left, but there was nothing there. At least I saw nothing. Then I noticed that every nightlight in my house was switched off. I shrugged it off, figuring it was a power outage. Although I did have a backup battery, I assumed maybe it was exhausted too. I turned around to go back to sleep. That's when I felt it again, but this time with greater strength. With a complete sense that no one was there with me, my body froze. The blanket started pulling up and down, basically in every direction, as if it wanted to remove it from my body, and finally it did. The blanket started scuffling and folding aggressively behind my back. That's it. No grunting, humming, mumbling, or even creaking of my bed due to such chaotic activity, just aggressive scuffling of the blanket and the dead silence of the night. It was very close to me, as I could feel the air from the blanket movement on my neck. My heart started jumping out of my chest, and I began to cry, then eventually passed out from the fear. I woke up the next morning on the same side and in the same position. My blanket, though, had been thrown all the way to the other side of the bed. I looked into the mirror and saw rashes around my neck due to the blanket pulling and rubbing. I lived there for a couple more weeks, then moved out, but thinking about that night still keeps me awake. I hope to never encounter anything like that ever again.